Chapter 13, Art and Accusations. Mr. Johnson opened and shut his mouth for several seconds without a sound coming out. At last he croaked, "Mrs. Hunt, I'm afraid I'm unwell. I'm going to go home and I'm going to go to bed. Would you take charge of this child?" His voice dropped to a mumble like an old man's. Omri just caught the words, "Back to their lessons." When Mr. Johnson let go of Patrick's arms, he turned and walked most unsteadily to the door. Then he put his hand. As he swayed, he thought he might fall over. "Mr. Johnson," said Mrs. Hunt in a shocked tone, "shall I call a taxi?" No, I think I'll be all right," said the headmaster without looking back. He tottered into the corridor. "Well," exclaimed Mrs. Hunt, "whatever have you been doing to that poor man?" Neither of them answered. Omri was staring at Patrick, rather at his pocket. Patrick's shoulders were heaving, and he was not looking at anybody. Mrs. Hunt was obviously flummoxed. "Well, you've better go to the toilet and wash your faces, both of you, and then go back to your classrooms as fast as you can toddle," she said in her funny old-fashioned way. "Run along, both of you." They needed no second telling. Neither of them said a word, and then they were in the boys' toilet. Patrick went straight to the basin and running the cold water. He splashed them onto his face, getting his collar soaked. Omri stood watching him. Obviously, he was upset as Omri, if not more so. Once Omri felt the friendship trembling on the edge of destruction. He drew a deep breath. "You showed him," he said with a last trembling voice. Patrick said nothing. He dried his face on the roller towel. You could tell he'd been crying by the gasps that he was making. "Give them back to me, both of them." Patrick slowly reached into his pocket, and he put his closed hand backward. Omri looked at his fingers slowly and opened. Little Bear and Boone were sitting there, absolutely terrified. They were actually clinging to one another. Even Little Bear was hiding his face. They were both trembling. With infinite slowness and care, and not to frighten either one of them any more, Omri took them into his own hands. "It's all right," he whispered. "It'll be okay." Then he put them carefully into his pocket and said to Patrick in a low voice, "You're a stupid fool." Patrick turned his face to Omri more with a jolt than Mr. Johnson had. It was white and molted red and swollen eyes. "I had to," he said. "I had to. He'd have phoned my dad. They'd have made me tell him in the end anyway. Anyhow, he didn't believe in them. He thought he was seeing things. He just stood there gaping at them. He didn't even touch them. When they moved, he gave a yell, and then I thought he was going to fall over. Then he went as white as a ghost. You saw. He didn't believe his eyes, Omri, honest. He'll think he dreamt it." Omri went over looking at him stonily. Can I have Boone?" asked Patrick in a small voice. "No." "Please, I'm sorry, I told I had to." "They're not safe with you. You use them. They're people. You treat them like people. You can't use people like that." Patrick didn't ask again. He gave one more hiccuping sob and went out. Omri took the little men out of his pocket again. He lifted them to his face, and Boone was lying flat on the front, holding his big hat down over his ears, trying to shut out the world. But Little Bear stood up. "Big man shout. Give fear," he said angrily. "Small ears, big noise, no good." "I know, I'm sorry," said Omri. "But it's okay now. I'm going to take you home." "What about wife?" Oh, his promise. Omri had forgotten all about that. Another Indian. Another little person to worry about. Omri had heard about people going gray-haired almost overnight, as if they had too much worry. He felt it might easily happen to him. He thought back in time, only a few days ago, when this had all started, and he had fondly imagined it was all going to be the greatest thing ever. Now he realized that this was more like a nightmare. But Little Bear was looking at him challengingly, and he had promised right after school, he said. Right after school, we'll go to the shop. Then Little Bear looked satisfied. There was still another hour of lessons that had to be got through. Fortunately, it was 2 periods of art. In the art room, you could get away and go in a corner and even sit with your back turned to the teacher if you liked. So Omri went to the farthest, darkest corner he could find. Omri, don't try to draw there, said the art teacher. You're in your own light. It's bad for your eyes. I'm going to draw something huge anyway, said Omri. With all the others that sat near the windows, he was quite alone, and if another teacher approached him, he could hear their feet on the bare floor. So he suddenly felt he must simply get a little fun out of this somehow. He cautiously fished Little Bear and Boone out of his pocket. They stood there on the sheet of drawing paper, as if it was a stretch of snow, and looked about them. This school place? Asked Little Bear. Yes. Shh. You don't look much like a school you sure don't look like a school I went to, said Boone. Where's the rows of desks? Where's the slate? Where's a bit of chalk? You can't sit anywhere where you like. Why ain't the teacher talking? We're doing art. We can sit anywhere we want, and she doesn't talk much. She lets us get on with it, replied Omri in the softest whisper he could possibly manage. Art, eh? Asked Boone, brightening up. Say, was that math best subject? I was allus taught in art. Only thing I was only good at was art. Still draw, mate, and I gets chance if nobody around to laugh at me. So he reached into the pocket of his own tiny jeans and fished out a little snub of pencil, almost too small to see. Can I draw on your paper? He asked. Omri nodded. Boone strode to the very center of the paper. He looked all around at the white expanse stretching away from him in every direction. He gave a deep sigh of satisfaction. When he knelt down, he began to draw. Little Bear and Omri watched for the microscopic points of Boone's pencil, where developed the most amazing scene. It was a prairie landscape with hills and cacti and a few tufts of sagebrush. Boone sketched it with sure strokes. Some wooden buildings, such as Omri had often seen in cowboy films, a saloon with a swinging sign that read Golden Dollar Saloon, a twirly writing, a post office, a general store, a livery stable, a stone house with the barred windows saying jail. Then, moving swiftly onto his knees, as if it was from one end of the street to the other, Boone drew the foreground, the figures of men and women and wagons and horses and dogs and trappings of the little town. From Boone's point of view, he was drawing something quite large, making the best of the use of the piece of paper. But from Omri's, the drawing was minute, perfect in its detailing, but smaller than any human hand could possibly have made it. Then he and Little Bear watched, fascinated. Boone, you're an artist, Omri breathed at last. When Boone had even made it to the mud on the pavement streak, he made it look real. Little Bear grunted. Huh. But not like real place, he said. Boone didn't trouble to answer. In fact, he was so absorbed he probably didn't even hear. But Omri frowned, and he understood. Of course, Boone's town was part of America. That was not thought of during the Little Bear's time. Boone, he whispered, bending his head down. What year is it in your town? What time is it? Last I saw a newspaper, it was 1889, said Boone. There's my drawing. Not bad, eh? It's absolutely brilliant. Omri was enthralled. Omri! Omri jumped, his 2 hands instantly cupped over the 2 men. From the other side of the room, the teacher said, I see it's no use trying to stop you from chattering. You do it even when you're alone. Bring me your paper. For a moment, Omri hesitated, but this was too much fun and too marvelous to pass up. So he scooped the men up into his pocket, picked up the sheet of paper. For once, it wouldn't stop to think. He'd just enjoy himself. He carried Boone's drawing to the teacher and put it innocently in her hand. What happened then made up for the good deal of worry and general upset the whole man had caused him all day. First she glanced. At a glance, the drawing looked like a bunch of scribbles or smudges. "I thought you said you were drawing something huge." She said with a laugh, "This isn't more than a..." Wait a minute. And then she took a second look, then a much closer look. She stared without speaking, and for about 2 minutes, while Omri felt the inside beginning a huge, gleeful, uncontrollable laugh, abruptly the art teacher, who had been perched on the desk, stood up, went to the cupboard. To Omri wasn't not surprised. She went to get a magnifying glass in her hand, and then she turned around. She put the paper down on the table and bent over it. With the glass poised, she examined the drawing for several minutes, her face something quite to see. Some of the nearest children came over and were aware something unusual was going on, and they were also craning to see what the teacher was looking at so attentively. Omri stood with the same innocent look on his face, waiting, the laugh slowly rising up inside him. Fun? This was fun, if you liked. This was what he'd been imagining this whole time. The teacher looked at him. Her face was not quite as stunned as Mr. Johnson's had been, but it was an absolute picture of bafflement. "Omri," she said, and how in the name of all that's holy did you do this?" "I like drawing small," said Omri quite truthfully. "Small? This isn't small. This is tiny. This is infinitesimal. It's microscopic." Her voice was rising higher and higher with every word. Several of the other children had now stood up and were crowding around the paper, peering to see the absolute stupefaction. The small gasps and exclamations of wonder were rising on all sides. Omri held in laugh threatened to explode. His teacher's eyes were now narrowing with astonishment and doubt. "Show me," she said. "The pencil you used." This took Omri back, but only for a second. "I left it over there." "I'll just go on and get it," he said. He walked to the back of his table, put his hand in his pocket. With his back turned, he bent over, apparently searching the top of the table. Then he turned around, smiling, holding up something cupped in his hand, and he walked back. "Here it is," he said. He held it in his hand. Everyone bent forward. The art teacher took a hold of his hand and pulled it towards her. "Are you putting me on, Omri? There's nothing there." "Yes, there is." She peered closer, and she could feel it with the warmth of her breath in her hand. "Don't breathe hard," said Omri. His laugh was now trembling on his very lips. "You'll blow it away." "Maybe you'll see it better with the magnifying glass," he added kindly. Slowly she raised the glass into position, and she looked through it. "Can I see? Oh, it's there. Can I look?" clamored the teacher. Clamored the other students. All except Patrick. He was sitting by himself, not paying attention to the crowd or Omri. The art teacher lowered her glasses. Her eyes were dazed. "I don't believe it." "It's there." "How did you pick it up?" "Ah, well, that's a bit of a secret method I have." "Yes," she said. "Yes, it must be. And you wouldn't feel like telling us, would you?" No, sorry," said Omri, trembly voice. His laugh was starting to get the best of him. It was right on the verge. It was going to burst out. May I be excused?" "Yes," she said in a dazed voice. "Go on." He took the drawing back and tottered out the door. He managed to get outside before the laugh actually blew out, but it was so loud and so overpowering that he was obliged to go right to the playground. There he sank into the bench and laughed till he felt quite weak. Her face, he never enjoyed anything so much in his whole life. It had been so worth it. The bell rang. School's over. Omri brought the men back and held them up. "Guys," he said, "I enjoyed that. Thank you. Now we're going to the shop." Omri ran all the way to Yap's, got there before most of the other children even got out of school. In 10 minutes, the place would be full of kids buying potato chips and sweets and toys and comics. Just now, he had it to himself, and he had to make the most of the few minutes he had, so he went directly to the corner of the boxes where the plastic figurines were kept. He stood in the back with the main counter. He still was holding Little Bear and Boone in his hand, and he put them down among the figurines. The Cowboys and Indians box. He hadn't reckoned Boone's sensitive nature, however. "Holy catfish! Look at all them dead bodies," he squawked, hiding his eyes. "There must be a massacre." "They're not dead," said Little Bear scornfully. "Plastic," he said, and he kicked a plastic cowboy aside. Too many, he said to Omri. You fine woman, I choose. You'll have to be quick, said Omri in a low voice. He was already rummaging through the box. He picked up an Indian woman. There was a few. Of the 5 he found, one was clearly old. 2 had babies tied to their backs in parcels, laced up like boots. You don't want with a baby, I suppose. Little Bear gave him a look. No. I thought not, said Omri hastily. Well, then, what about these? He stood with 2 figures on the edge of the table. Little Bear jumped down to face them. He looked fully at the first one, then the other. They both looked the same to Omri, except one had a yellow dress on and the other had a blue dress on, and she had a black pigtail and a headband with a single feather and moccasins on her feet. Little Bear looked up. His face showed furious disappointment. No good, he said. But there aren't any others. Many, plastic. You look good. Find another. Omri rummaged frantically right to the bottom of the box. Kids were beginning to come into the shop. He almost had despaired when he saw her. She lay face down on the very bottom, the box half hidden by 2 cowboys and a horse. He pulled her out. She was the same as the others, apparently, except she wore a red dress. The others, apparently, except she wore a red dress. Obviously, this came out of the same mold, but because they were all the different positions of walking, if the others were ugly, so this one sure would be. Without much hope, he set it before Little Bear. He stood there staring at her. The shop was getting full now. At any moment, someone would come up and be waiting. Well, Omri said impatiently. For another 5 seconds, Little Bear stared. Then, without speaking a word, he nodded his head. Omri didn't wait for him. He changed his mind. He scooped up Boone back, put it in his pocket. Picking up the approved figure, he made his way to the counter. Just one, please, he said, Mr. Yap looking at him a very odd look. Are you sure you only want the one, he asked. Yes, Mr. Yap looked at the plaster figure, dropped it in the bag, and gave back to Omri. 10 pence. Omri paid and left the store. Suddenly he felt a hand on his shoulder, and he spun around. It was Mr. Yap. The look on his face was not odd at all, but red and angry. Now, can you hand the other 2 over that you stole? Omri stood aghast. I didn't steal any. Don't add lying to your faults, my lad. I watched you put them in your pocket, a cowboy and an Indian. Omri's mouth hung open. He thought he was going to be sick. I didn't, he tried to say, but no words came out. Turn out your pockets. They're mine, Omri managed to gasp. A likely story, and I suppose you bought them to help you choose the new one? Yeah, I did. Yeah, right, said Mr. Yap hastily. Come on, quit playing around. I lose hundreds of pounds worth of stuff this year by you thieving kids. When I do catch one of you, I'm sure to make an example of you. I'm not likely to let it pass, and I know your sort. If I let you go, you'll be boasting to all your pals at school how easy it was to get away with it, and most likely you'll be back tomorrow for a pocketful. Omri was now fighting back tears. Quite the crowd had collected, much like the crowd in the art room. Some of the same people even, but his feelings were no longer so pleasant. He wished he could go and disappear. It's no good trying to get around me by crying, shouted Mr. Yap. Give them back right now, or I'll call the police. All at once, Patrick was beside him. They're his, he said. I know they're his because he showed them to me at school. A cowboy with the white hat and an Indian with the chief's headdress. He told me he was coming to buy a new one. Omri wouldn't steal. Mr. Yap let go of Omri and looked at Patrick. He knew Patrick quite well because it happened to be Patrick's brother had once been his paper boy. Will you vouch for him then? Of course I will, said Patrick staunchly. I'm telling you, I saw them both this afternoon. But still, the shopkeeper wasn't absolutely convinced. Let's see if they fit your description, he said. Omri, who had been staring at Patrick as some miraculous deliverer, felt his stomach drop to his shoes once more. But then he had an idea. He reached in both hands of pockets. He held one slowly and still closed. Everyone looked at it. Even though it was actually empty, the other hand lifted up to his mouth to stifle a cough. And he whispered into it, Lie still, don't move, plastic. Then he put both hands before him and opened them. The men played along beautifully. There they lay, by the side, stiff and stark, like the lifeless plastic figurines could possibly be. In any case, Omri wasn't taking any chances. He gave Mr. Yap just long enough to see that they were what Patrick had said before closing his hands. Yap grunted. Yeah, those aren't from my shop anyhow, he said. All of my Indian chiefs are sitting down. And that sort of cowboy, Always has a horse. Well, I'm sorry, lad. You have to excuse me, but you must admit it did look suspicious. Omri managed a sickly smile. The crowd was melting away, and Mr. Yep shuffled back into the shop. Omri and Patrick were left alone on the pavement. Thanks, said Omri, without his croaky frog voice. That's okay. Have a tofu. They had each one and walked along side by side. After a while, they had each other gave a quick grin. Let's give them some. They stopped and took the men out and gave them each a little bit of the chocolate. That's a reward, said Patrick, for playing dead. Little Bear naturally demanded to know what it had been all about. The boys explained as well as they could. Little Bear was quite intrigued. Man think Omri steal Little Bear? Yes. And Boone? Omri nodded. Omri fool to steal Boone, roared Little Bear, laughing. Boone, stuffing himself up with chocolate, gave him a dirty look. Where woman? Little Bear asked eagerly. I've got her. When make real? Tonight. Patrick gave him a look of pure longing, but he isn't saying anything. They walked again, and they were getting near Omri's house. Omri was thinking. After a while, he said, Patrick, what about you stay the night? Patrick's face lit up like a bulb. Could I? And see? Yes? Wow. Thanks. And they ran the rest of the way home.